Greetings everyone, in this video we will be looking at the comparison and contrast of Germany's political behavior towards one chosen country, in which this case we chose the United States. Me, Jaiya, alongside with my three other team members, Watana and Sripal will try our best to illustrate the whole contents within this video for you. Now before we begin, let's talk a little bit about Germany's history. Germany has always had a very controversial reputation dated back to the 1900s of being the world's central power during the World War, and up until now in modern days, Germany is a democratic state with a six-party system. So within this information, we can pretty much assume that Germany has pretty much changed a lot over the past couple of decades. And in order to compare the political identity and behaviors of Germany as well as the United States, we have to understand several aspects to this. So first of all, we will be looking at political interest and identity, in which I will be responsible and guide you guys along the way, and then we will also be looking at the political culture and efficacy, and then on top of that we will also be looking at the political trust, political interest and knowledge, as well as finally political participation. So in order to start with this part, we first will start with political identity and interest. So we have to understand that political identity and interest is not a random phenomenon. It happens based on the individual's circumstances, personal circumstances. So when we look at Germany, this country has went through a lot, as I said earlier, World War II and being the world's central power. And here in political interest and identity, we will be looking at two main points, which is first of all material, and then second of all is ideal. So material, here we will be looking at money, things like promotion and taxation, and then as for ideals, we will be looking at things such as political values, their religious belief, freedom, and a sense of justice. So guided by these two main things, we will first start off with Germany. So Germany is a democratic state, as I've mentioned earlier. The system that this country holds is a federal parliamentary republic system. And this is where the federal legislative power is heavily vested inside the Bundestag, which is the parliament of Germany. And then the other one would be the Bundesrat, which is the representative body of the Länder, or we also know it as the regional states of Germany. So the German constitution is built heavily based on Christianity. We even have one political party just based on Christianity itself. So with this kind of information, we can link it towards the American political interest and identity. Why? Because we believe that the American political interest and constitution is also mainly built heavily towards Christianity, as we see on the dollar currency that it says, "In God we trust." So we can assume that most of the American Constitution is also built solely based on Christianity itself. So aside from these two similarities, we also see another similarity between the two countries, which is the fact that they both advocate for, first of all, democracy, human rights, and individual liberty. So these countries have really deep Western values, and these would be their similarity between Germany and America, because they're all democratic states with high values in terms of human rights, and they're very against human rights violation, and they advocate for freedom. So apart from their very similarities, we also have a few contrasting differences. So even though they can be assumed as pretty similar, however, unfortunately, the American federal is actually, we can assume it as the counter system from Germany. So counter in terms of what? Counter in terms of the United States Constitution actually defines as a little bit more broader, wider. It calls for more diversity. The dual federalism of the United States allows for more diversity and autonomy than the one that the German constitution has. And whereas Germany, they commit more towards a system of policy integration between federal government and the state. So this would be the sole parts of political interest and identity, and then we shall move on to the next part, which is political culture. Thank you.
Moving on to the next part, political culture. The main point here is to compare and contrast political culture between Germany and the United States, as defined by Gabriel Amon and George Bingham Powell, who are the American political scientists, define that political culture is the set of attitudes, beliefs, and feelings about the current politics in the nation at a given time. So the point here is to find out political culture according to the definition. So let's find out about the similarity. Between the two countries, the very significant similarity is the unification. As far as we know, from the end of World War II until 1990, the nation was divided into two separate countries under the different system of rule, West Germany and East Germany. And then in 1990, unification happened, and Germany finally became one once again and officially became the Federal Republic of Germany. While for the US, that's also the unification happened, as the country has long gained independence on 4th July 1776. Then they unified the 13 colonies into one state, which is called the United States as presently. Besides similarity, there are also a lot of different political culture between the two. Germany tends to strongly focus on the value of privacy, critical thinking, tolerance, respect, and more into a cultural resistance. German people tend not to express a lot of their personal information about themselves or discuss their political and social views when first meeting. They are skeptical and are encouraged to view everything with lessons of the past in their mind and access the consequences of certain situations, as well as their responsibility to respond to them. While in terms of patriotism, many German people would feel skeptical and uncomfortable to not really proudly express themselves or their sense of patriotism as in the past following the World War II events. For the US, founders of America endorsed the equality and liberty which these have become incorporated into the political culture of the United States and a central belief of egalitarianism and individualism. Survey data indicate that between 80 to 90% of Americans believe it is essential to treat all people equally regardless of race or ethnic background. In a sense, Americans are more likely to promote equal political rights such as Voting Rights Act of equal participation for all qualified voters, and they have an expectation of equality of opportunity. They believe that each individual has the same chance to get ahead in society. And for political efficacy between Germany and US, PIAAC, which is a program of assessment and analysis of adult skills, has conducted survey on political efficacy based on data from over 150,000 respondents in 28 countries, asking individuals from strongly agree to strongly disagree on statement, "People like me have no say in what the government does." So here's the result of those 28 countries, and I've seen that the percentage of individuals who report that they strongly agree with this statement from Germany is over 20%, while from the United States it's only about 15%, which is relatively lower than the Germany. That is why people in the United States are more openly and expressively towards politics than the Germany.
Moving on, we will talk about the political participation in the Germany and the US. Political participation generally refers to the voluntary activities taken by mass public or individual to influence public policy of the government, either directly or indirectly. Political participation can be seen to two forms, which is conventional, such as voting, talk about politics and join political group, and unconventional, such as protest, demonstration, and boycotting.
In this sense, Germany and the US do share similarity and differences regarding political participation. Concerning conventional political participation, elections from the past until now are still the fundamental of democracy, and voting is the primary means of taking part in politics, since it allows people to choose their representative based on their interests and shape the future society that they want to live in. In Germany, citizens who are 18 years old and hold the country's citizenship are eligible to vote. German citizens have to cast 2 votes at the same time, 1 vote for the candidate and the second for political party to represent in the parliament. Voting turnout is an indicator that reflects people's interest in politics and civic engagement. German voting turnout has declined, reaching its lowest point in 2009. However, in the last 2007 election in Germany, out of 61.69 million people who are eligible to vote, 49.98 million people exercised their rights to vote, which accounted for 76.2% voting turnout. Unconventional political participation, on the other hand, is another form of engagement in politics aimed to influence and challenge the government through non-institutional means. In Germany, demonstration and protest has been there since the end of World War II. Germans embrace rule and order and are not afraid of demonstration and protest. If you look at German large-scale demonstration, it has succeeded in achieving the goal of changing major social and environmental issues. In the past, Germans were likely to protest for unity and democracy. However, modern protests call for a change in environmental and social issues. For instance, Friday for Future is a mass movement in which 10,000 of young people in Berlin mobilize every Friday on the street calling for climate protection. In the US, citizens who are 18 years old and above holding citizenship are eligible to vote. During the presidential election, citizens have to only cast 1 vote choosing their favorite candidate. Americans have many options in engaging in politics. Contributing money to a candidate, party, and political organization is one of the common things in the US. Those with a high degree of education and income make a large donation to a political campaign and are likely to gain some access and able to influence candidate or party when they are in the office. In addition, Americans also engage in an array of activity during the election campaign. They vote for political party, organize election campaign, and attend campaign rally. The 2020 election in America is the most highest voting turnout presidential election in which accounted for 66.3%. Now take a look at how Americans involved in unconventional political participation. Racism has existed since the colonial era until now, while Americans enjoy the privilege and right, while the minority, especially African Americans, face discrimination. Black Lives Matter is a social movement fighting for racism and anti-black violence, especially in the form of police brutality. In 2020, George Floyd, who is African American, was murdered by police officer nailed on George's neck, despite the fact that he said he could not breathe. Regardless of the differences, both countries also share similarity. The young generation are less likely to vote in elections than the older generation, while the young people are engaged more in direct form of political participation such as demonstration, protest, sign petition, and boycotting.
So now I'm going to talk about the political trust. But before getting into the discussions of this part, I would like to give the definitions of political trust first. According to scholars, political trust can be understood as support of citizen support for their political institutions such as government and parliament in the face of uncertainty about or the vulnerability to the actions of government. While the political trust is treated as the pro-democratic value, its absence is not evidently detrimental to democracy. Rather, skepticism stimulates political engagement and signal a willingness to judge the institution by their own merits. In other words, political trust concern the object, which are institutions and procedure that link overriding democratic principle to the everyday actors and policy. Although conceptually distinct, empirically scholars find that political trust is related to support for policy as well as support for political institutions. Therefore, political trust is a rational concept that links the subject who trusts to the object who is trusted.
So for Germany and the United States, they do share similarity and differences in terms of public trust. According to a survey conducted by Ideal Trust and Barometer, which is a global communication firm that partners with businesses and organizations, in 2018, Germany received 43% of trust from their citizens, while the US received only 33% of trust from their citizens. And in 2020, 59% of German people show their trust to their government, whereas the US gained only 42% of trust from their citizens. So we can see that, as indicated in both charts, the public trust in the US is lower than that in Germany. Even though we saw that the figures in both countries increased from 2017 to 2020, throughout our history, both countries also experienced a decline in public trust in government. As in Germany, nuclear plant and immigrant issue were seen as the factors that drive trust in government downward. For instance, in 2010, as Merkel conservative liberal democracy decided to extend the deadline of phasing out the usage of nuclear power, it spurred anti-nuclear protests throughout Germany. As the result, the anti-nuclear Green Party could gain more popularity from German citizens. Moreover, in the case of immigrants, German people always show their concern about this issue. According to one survey conducted in Germany, it shows that 81% of Germans disapprove of Merkel's handling of the refugee crisis, one of which was when her decision to welcome refugees from war-torn Syria in 2015. On the other hand, for the US, the weak performance of the government resulted in the decline in trust. However, if we look at chart during the presidency of George W. Bush, after he declared a war on terror, we could see the sharp increase in terms of public trust, because at the time the government action matched with citizen interest. Overall, we can see that the good performance of the government will eventually lead to the increase in public trust.